The Nigerian Economic Summit Group was formed in 1996 as a platform for public-private sector cooperation on Nigeria's economic development. Every year, the NESG has held the Nigerian Economic Summit in furtherance of its aim of open and continuous dialogues on Nigeria's economic development. NESG's stated vision is to become Nigeria's leading private sector think tank committed to the development of a modern, globally competitive economy. It seeks to achieve this through policy advocacy, research and communication, and education. Mr. Foluso Phillips is chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group and executive chairman of the Phillips Consulting Group, a firm engaged in business and management consulting. He joins us today on View from the Top, and I'm really glad. Thank you very much, Mr. Phillips, for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And I thank you for tuning in. Here's a brief biography of Mr. Phillips before we begin our conversation. Foluso Phillips was born on February 5, 1953. He got a degree in industrial economics from the University of Wales's Institute of Science and Technology. He's a chartered management accountant of the United Kingdom and a chartered accountant of Nigeria. He had worked in Pfizer's livestock feeds business as the financial controller and company secretary. He spent 6 years with Coopers and Lybrand International, now PricewaterhouseCoopers in the United Kingdom, working on a variety of assignments internationally. Mr. Phillips also worked with the SUA Group as the Group General Manager Finance from 1990 to 1992. In 1992, he set up Phillips Consulting Limited, a management consulting firm of which he is currently the chairman and CEO. Mr. Phillips is a director of several companies, charities, and NGOs in Nigeria. He holds directorships in Nigerian South African Chamber of Commerce, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, Special Olympics of Nigeria, African Business Roundtable, and he's a member of the Institute of Directors in South Africa. Mr. Phillips, what specific reforms are needed to accelerate and sustain economic growth in Nigeria?
It always comes down to this issue about infrastructure, power, roads, ability to just get on with my life. And I believe that that is one area that one needs to focus on, or any government needs to focus on.
Investors rightly say that policy consistency over a prolonged period is important. But Nigeria is known for policy somersaults, which is generally agreed to retard growth. How can we maintain continuity in policies despite changes in government? Maybe I should start by asking you what is responsible for these policy somersaults in the first place. Is it that they're not well thought through ab initio?
Well, that's the starting point. And sometimes you find, don't forget that we do have a legislative system in this country where a lot of laws need to be passed, and these laws are influenced by, we say policies, we say laws with bills and so on. But the key thing is we need to ask ourselves the extent to which a particular policy is sustainable and is, first of all, not political. Secondly, it is one that's got the backing of the law, okay? And finally, one that is really not situational. A situational policy is one that suits people at a particular point in time. And when the people are off the stage, it no longer works, and therefore we need to change it again. We need to look at the history of these policy somersaults and see the extent to which it's happening. I believe that nowadays it's not happening that much. I believe what most investors are looking for is an environment that allows them to, people talk about strong institutions, people talk about the need for me to have the legal redress if I do have a situation where things are not going right. It's having that confidence that I will come into your country, I will do business with you, but if things go wrong, how and to what extent am I going to be protected by the law? And I can rely that the law will be just and it will be fair. And I think these are the things that worry investors more, as opposed to the issue about policy somersaults. We used to suffer a lot about changes in import, whether you can import something, whether it is banned, the tariffs and so on and so forth. And those are sometimes governed by the situation. Like I said, people have turned up and said we need to be protected in a way, therefore please ban the importation of a particular item or increase the tariff on it so that we can protect our own homegrown industry. And you tend to look at that from the outside and say that all these policy somersaults, as we call it, is really not working in the interest of the people or interest of business and commerce. So I believe that to a great extent, we need to be specific and we need to take each one. I would like a situation where we say, well, why did we change that particular policy halfway through or 2 months down the line or 3 years down the line, and see whether there's a particular response to that.
Talking about specifics, one policy that I suspect might suffer a reversal is the Nigeria's automotive policy because of the opposition against it from many of its stakeholders. What do you think of that policy? What do you think of that policy to start with?
Well, I think, I'm of the opinion that we really need to get our priorities right. We know we need to industrialize. There's no doubt about it. But I sometimes wonder whether we are playing to our competitive advantage and our competitive strengths. You find that we seem to be out of practice a lot from an industrial point of view. We don't have a strong technology base, a strong technical base. We scream about how poor our vocational skills are and vocational training. That is why I tend to move more to the side of agriculture and say, how can we develop a very powerful and strong agricultural value chain, agro-business? Let's learn how to feed the nation. Let's learn how to get value from feeding ourselves. Let's strengthen our capability in doing that. And not bother too much about trying to compete with other global players that are very, very good at making automotives. We end up importing, a huge number of parts for the cars that we want to make. And I ask us that where we are in a particular life cycle as a nation, is that really where we need to be playing? Different people have different responses to that. Many, many years ago, we used to export cars, the Santana and the 504s and so on and so forth. But that whole system stopped. And what has happened over the period is that we've stopped learning how to do these things. We've stopped being a very industrial and manufacturing type nation because we just stopped doing these things. And so to start off again, you begin to ask yourself, well, where should we be putting our energy? The automotive industry, the policy is one that I believe that from a priority point of view, it's a good idea, but I'm not sure it's a priority.
How can we improve the existing structure of public service to meet the country's economic development goals? And where do you see the greatest room for improved efficiency in the public sector?
The public sector is our own very sophisticated social security system. And I hope I don't get shot for saying that. But I think that to a great extent, people will tell you that certainly in my father's time that the public sector had the creme de la creme of society working within it, but things have changed now. And the reason why it has changed is that I think to a great extent, the whole essence of governance itself has been challenged by the prolific availability of oil revenue. You see, any country will always look after its people, its manufacturing, its industrial base, its productive base. It would always look after that because that is how it survives. I will survive from the taxation, from the royalties, and the kind of revenues I get from commerce and industry. But, and therefore I need to run a very efficient shop. And I cannot allow the civil service structure, public service structure, to exceed the size of the economy that I'm managing. But when the size of that economy is inflated simply because the volume and value of revenue that you get from oil comes into the system, there's this rather confused and totally wrong concept of how large the economy is. And therefore, we continue to expand our civil service structure. And when you have excess supply, inefficiencies turn up. And people begin to sort of not work because there is really no great need to work. If we had to survive because our agriculture and our manufacturing and all those aspects of our economy need to really thrive, then you find that the government itself is working so hard to make it happen, because that is how the government itself survives, from the taxation and all the other revenues and so on that come to play. But that has not been the case. And each time I say this, don't forget, replicate this in 36 states and the federal capital. It's never just Nigeria. So our civil service, has been spoiled and has been funded. You look at our cost structure, it's significantly towards supporting government, and we're saying we don't have enough going into capital expenditure and so on. So there's a long history of that has developed over the years, and it has become a way of life and a habit.
As you pointed out, about 70% of what we have goes towards funding the public service, recurrent expenditure, and only about 30% is left for infrastructure and things like that. Do you think, we know this is not sustainable, so I won't ask you whether this is sustainable. We know this isn't sustainable, but do you think that government will have the political will to do what's right, and how can they do it?
Well, first of all, sometimes political will is driven by reality. We are earning averagely about, I think, $54 a barrel or so, and when you look at the major source of revenue for government, it's from our oil revenues. And if you look at it from that point of view, we are not going to have enough money to sustain, I think, going forward, the level of expenditure that we currently have experienced in the country to date. So I think the new government has got a huge challenge of trying to see how it's going to restructure the system. Certainly, I'm not expecting the government is going to go laying off people. I don't know what the policy is going to be as far as that's concerned. But certainly, we're going to have to begin to hopefully constrict and reduce the size of government. So we need to begin to revisit that. That's why I keep going back to the legislature and saying that, look, what kind of new laws must we put in place that deals with the reality of this country going forward, rather than a wish list. Now, what begins to as you say, shine your eyes, is where the revenue that you have to run government cannot sustain the size of government that you had before. And people are going to have to start thinking very, very quickly of how to deal with that challenge. And all I can just say is that I leave that to the new government to deal with.
We have to take a break. At this point, we ask that you please join us again after this very short break.